We are live. Welcome, everyone. Let's see who we got so far. We got Ursula, welcome. Greg, Mary, Sandra, Deb, Mark, Frank, Ken, George, Imogen, Scott. This is long. Penty, Nick, Marina, Maylee, Charles, Gary, Carol, Mary, and the list, it kind of goes on. So, and there's more people coming in now. Welcome, everyone, to another hopefully fantastic, incredible session of our episode control training. Howard is going to really take the lead this time. We're going to be talking about writing scripts. He's done a lot of prep work in terms of real strategies about, the script writing process, of integrating the script writing process, and doing that with our, using our software. So before we get going with the actual training, I think the way we're going to start this is I'm going to go quickly through the software and just kind of do a refresher in terms of how the script part of the software works together with, sort of like just how it integrates and how the script part of the software work. I'll just take a few minutes, review that. Sorry, I'm looking over here for a second. And then we'll pass it over to Howard to kind of do his presentation. He worked really hard on it, so hopefully you guys will appreciate it. I wanted to show you something here before we get going. Even with that, we're going to do another preamble. So right here in my hand, this is, just everybody, I just want to make sure you guys can see and hear us. I usually just call out in the chat that you can see and hear us. This is what they call now a TV pitch Bible, TV show pitch Bible. At the time, which is called The Treatment. I wrote this together as my senior year NYU Film School, one of my projects I had to do. With a buddy of mine, Lauren, and I'm still friends with Lauren. We were just actually texting just the other day. I think it might have been yesterday, the day before. And we did this in 1993. And if you were to go through this, and I'm going to explain why I'm showing it in a second, but if you go through this, the way they write pitch Bibles is substantially similar to this pitch Bible. And sometime next week, probably Wednesday or Thursday next week, we're going to be starting the advanced training. And the first thing we're going to be doing with that advanced training is we are going to be showing and going through what actual pitch Bibles look like. Because the advanced training is going to we're going to go through the whole process of sort of starting with just an idea. We've got a couple ideas, and we'll be explaining those ideas, and we're going to narrow it down to one idea, and we're going to develop the characters, we're going to develop the season, we're going to develop the episodes, and ultimately we'll probably write a pilot, and we're going to develop our own pitch Bible. And next week is going to be probably the first session. And if you're not signed up yet, I don't want you to miss out. So I'm going to do something I have not done yet, is I'm going to do a direct pitch. I'm going to post a link for anyone who's not signed up for the advanced training. I'm going to put up a link. We're still honoring the beta pricing. So it's a great price. I'm just put up the advanced training setup, just a join link. If you're interested, one of the first things we're going to be doing is they can look at not only this pitch Bible, but a couple other pitch Bibles, and that'll be next week. Now, before we do that, we're going to have one extra training session pertaining to the basic sort of introductory training for episode control, which is we're going to go through a drama series, the drama series template, and just kind of like look at that one session, sort of like a once over, what's different, how to think about it differently and whatnot. But one thing I want to show about this pitch Bible, which is pretty cool. So we wrote this in 1993, and in 1990, and it's about a bunch of friends living in a New York City apartment. And it was based on my life, and it's my brother, who I lived in the apartment with, and then it was me. I'm the main character in our TV show, and then my friend Lauren he was always like my best friend. He was hanging out all the time, and then I had a roommate whose name was Andy at the time, and then his girlfriend was hanging around, and then my girlfriend, who became my wife, was hanging around, and we built a show around that, and we thought it would be an incredible TV show based on sort of like building off of sort of the Seinfeld mode. And the teacher, her name was Susan. I don't remember her last name. She was an actual wasn't an actual professor. She was like one of those, what do they call, adjunct professors. They come in and they teach like one class, and she was a real producer working in the city. So I always tried to take the classes with teachers like that. And she didn't like the name. We called it the Murray and Larry Show, for Mitch and Laurie. The Murray and Larry Show. Murray was Mitch, and Larry was Lauren, and she wasn't thrilled with the title. She said, you should put in a page that has like alternate titles to consider, so producers will see like what other titles did you consider. So we came up with a bunch of ones, and I want to just share. And again, this is 1993, and Friends comes out in 1994. But look at one of the alternate titles. You see that? You see it? There we go. Bottom one, Friends. How cool is that? So we had an idea 1 year before Friends would come out. We had an idea for the TV show called Friends, and substantially similar to the show Friends, actually, in many ways. All right. What was I going to do? That was it. That was my pitch. All right. Let me show this software, and then I'll pass it over to Howard. Let's take a look here. Share my screen. A few minutes, and then we'll get going. If you guys have any questions, comments, thoughts, ideas, put them in the chat. Howard will be monitoring while I'm talking, and I'll be monitoring it while Howard is talking. So I got to share my screen here. Application. I think I want to go here. Share. Pull this over here. Push this over here. All right, let's see what you guys see now. Uh-oh. You're not seeing the right thing. Stop share. Oop.
We see infinity.
Yeah, I hit the infinity button. Okay, let's try it again. Let me put this over here and this over here and try again. Put this one over here. Sorry, give me 1 second, everyone. I want to make sure I share the right screen.
Let me ask you guys in the meantime, I know Mitch sent out a link to the show house and an episode, a link to a script. Anybody out there get a chance to take a look at that?
All right, so real quick here while you're thinking about Howard's question. So here you can see, what we've been building. We've got heroes, we got villains, we got seasons, and then again, we have not released the updated software. I'm being told 2 more days, so hopefully by the end of the week. I have no control over this. This is just what it's taking. Apparently, it's quite involved. I have these ideas like, this is how I want the software to work, and he's like, yeah, we can do it. Tyron's like, yeah, no problem. Of course. A week later, it's still not done because it's more complicated. But I've just vision for the software, and we go with it. So every single time you create a season, I'm not going to go through the details of the season. If you haven't been on those trainings, just watch the replays. Every time you create, under the season, you've got the individual episodes. And every time you create an episode, it creates not only the episode, it creates a corresponding script. So here I've got 1, 2, 3, and 4 episodes. And whichever episode of the script I'm in, for instance, if I'm in episode 1, which, here, this is going to give you the episode 1 details along the left side. And you're in episode 1 script. And you can click over here. And, and of course, if you're in the script, you can just click amongst the scripts like this. And I believe, and I'm not sure, it's fully tested yet, but because I'm in the, if I was to rename this episode 1, right, The New Dawn, that. So not only does it rename that episode 1 here, but under the script, it would also be renamed as well. So just for corresponding, and of course, you could build out as many scripts as are required for a season. And then, of course, you could add additional season by hitting this plus up here. In terms of just working with the software, that blue tab over here on the right side also pulls out the script editor. It's buggy right now, so I'm not going to hit it. So working with this is super simple. If you're familiar with script writing, the format for a TV script is the same as for a movie. For the most part, you write it the same way. And playing with the script editor, I want to just review some of the features. You can't cut and copy like content from another screenwriting program and just dump it in here. That won't work. The way this script editor is built, let me just type a little bit of, so let's just say exterior, the house, and we got some cool shortcuts, which you'll learn as you type. So if you had a dash and then if you had D, N, E, it automatically writes in based on the assumption of what you want to type. So let's say exterior the house, they pull up, I don't know, whatever, they drive up. And then, tabbing will change. So let me just, if I go to I can tab, hitting the tab button changes the format type. So now I'm in transition. Again, there's a bunch of built-in assumptions. So D, dissolve to, C, cut to, S, smash cut to. I just built in some common ones that I know of. And again, hit enter, it automatically goes back to scene heading. If I hit I, it'll hit interior, interior of the room, dash again. N is night. They enter. So what happens here now, each one of these, and this is where I want to just now to have a little bit of content on here. Each one of these elements, so as I scroll through, here's scene heading, here is action, transition, scene heading. Each one of these, our software doesn't see one big script. Our software sees, in this case, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 elements. And depending on what the style, formatting style is set, it will place it accordingly. And if you were to take your content and just copy it in here, it's going to put it all into one element. And you really can't separate it once it does that. The reason we developed it like this is this allows for real-time collaboration amongst multiple users, because one of the challenges with collaboration is the document is usually one thing. So a final draft it's the whole thing is just one thing, and each part has its formatting. In our case, for instance, in this case, there's actually 5 things already in my script here. And the reason we did this is now I could be writing in one part and all the other users could be writing in another part. And that really has allowed for the dynamic real-time collaboration that you go with our software. And it's a really powerful script editor. It's got some advantages, in my opinion, over our final draft. For instance, some of the shortcuts I've built in, the tabbing, the real-time collaboration. In other ways, Final Draft is a very strong, powerful script editor. So we're gonna be attacking the script editor in the coming months. Next year probably, after we do some of the other things, or certain towards the end of the year, and really try to ramp it up. But you can definitely import and export from our software to Final Draft. So if you have any questions, thoughts, ideas, notes for us, you can hit us in the the chat or email us about the script editor. So that's just a quick overview of the script editor. I'm now going to turn everything over to Howard. Let me stop sharing here.
Okay. And Mitch, you and I have not rehearsed this, so it's going to be pretty much fly by the seat.
We don't rehearse anything. I don't rehearse anything. Listen, I'll sit and think about this. I mean, I don't come on blind, but I mean, I think about okay, I want to do this. I had an idea. Okay, let me present this. I didn't know what I was going to say. I just, and then some different ideas, and there we go.
In opposition to that idea, I was pretty much up all night prepping this. So how many of you guys are familiar with House? It's a show that I would kind of watch here and there. And one of the reasons why I'd watch it here and there was because it didn't seem to really have a week-to-week continuing story. It was like a procedural. And I'll just talk a little bit about why I chose this. One reason I chose this script, which is episode 5. Wow, look, our numbers just jumped up. Episode 3, I'm sorry. For some reason, it's called episode number 5501, which doesn't seem to correspond to anything. Usually that they'll say season 01, or they'll call season 3, episode 6306 or something like that. This one I had no clue. I had to Google it, and I was lucky that I actually found the actual show, because what that allowed me to do was read the script and then watch the show, and then watch the show again in high speed, looking through the script. And it really pointed out a lot of things. Now, I wasn't a huge fan of the show. I enjoyed it.
Can I interject one cool thing? Little side note about the producer's name, Shore. What's his first name is?
David Shore. He's also doing
David Shore. So his brother, I think his brother's Raphael Shore, who founder of a company called Jerusalem U in Jerusalem, in Israel, and they make documentary films about Israel. And the president of that show, of that company, is my wife's best friend. My wife's best friend, Tina. Right. So it's just cool little trivia.
Little tangential reroute.
Sorry to interrupt.
But it is. So basically, in Hollywood terms, Mitch and David Shore are like this.
We're best friends. Never met the guy, but we're
yeah. So, okay, so the lore of House is very interesting. And as I read the origin story of how House came about, it was very interesting. And I think it all feeds into into what we're really talking about, which is this is episode 3 right here. I marked it up. As I urge you guys to, as you're going through this, especially if you're stuck, find a show that is somewhere, it doesn't even necessarily need to be in the genre that you're writing about, but maybe like sort of in the, something that inspires you. Read the script, watch the show, look at where they bury things. I mean, the sign of really good writing is that they're like, take an archetypal show like Breaking Bad, is that they bury little nuggets along the way that, or should I say, seeds that then grow and sprout in future seasons. And that's really, you get to that two ways. One is you're really lucky, or two, you plan it out, or you have an approach to it that allows you to kind of do that. And that's one thing that the software allows you to do, is even if you don't plan it out consciously, you are actually building it up as you're building the foundation of your story in the software. And it gives you a resource to go back to constantly to say, okay, what elements did I introduce, and how do I use them, and how do I parse them out through future episodes, future seasons? So House started off pretty much as a conversation between Paul Attanasio, I think his name is, big screenwriter, and the studios. They were looking for a procedural medical show. But as they described it, a procedural medical show, what did they say here? The head of Fox Network said, I want a medical show, but I don't want white coats going down the hallways. Now, I don't know exactly how to interpret that, except they don't want it to be like ER. So it became a procedural, but basically a hero villain. And this is really cool, Mitch, because this feeds into a lot of things. And as they built this up, it gave them a lot more fertile ground to tell these stories. And another thing about House is that it takes place in this teaching hospital in somewhere in New Jersey. So it's far from glamorous. And so they were very careful about creating all the elements here for the show to kind of thrive. And it really thrives on character. But this is what's interesting. The hero villain aspect of it, which we've been talking about for 3 straight sessions already, was present in the origin idea for House, which is that it's going to be a procedural where the germs are the villains. So each week they present a new unsolvable, undiagnosable case, and this team, like Law and Order, has an unsolvable, fresh murder, is going to set about to crack it. And they're going to use all their resources, and they're going to have setbacks, and they're going to be reversals, and it's going to reveal character and points of view. And that's how each episode is going to go. But what David Short, according to the stuff I've read, what David Short did was he looked at this and he goes, that's great, except germs don't have motivations. In other words, it echoes what we're talking about villains. Villains need motivations. Germs just arbitrarily, kill, take over, destroy, whatever. There's no motivation. They're like Terminators, okay? Which is another reason why the movie Terminator was so interesting, is because it was a machine, but it had enough human qualities in AI learning that it became more human, and it had, but it had really one motivation, and germs have one motivation. So then the question became, if the germs have the motivation, then we need to, then the heroes are the doctors are the good guys. And then it's this constant good guy, absolutely bad element, the villain who kills just for killing. And that does not last very long. It's not very interesting. So in their brilliance, what they did was they created the main character as an anti-hero, okay, which gave a lot more texture to this environment. You associate hospitals and doctors with, I want to cure, we're here to cure, first do no harm, blah, blah, blah. But then you have a doctor they introduce named Gregory House, who is like the antithesis of every good doctor or television doctor, starting from Marcus Welby on through George Clooney. He's pretty much like the worst. And what's great is they bestow him such terrible traits, but at the heart of it, a heart of gold. Okay. And I came across, as I was getting ready this morning, a whole Wikipedia page all about Gregory House, which someone wrote, which is very well informed. But it actually goes back to things about his childhood. And I'm assuming some of these, I can tell from the text, some of these elements came out during future episodes. So just as episodes, always relate back to the origin story of the main character, they in watching the show House from 2004 on, you're actually getting a glimpse of what his origin story is, because it's very interesting. A guy like this just doesn't sprout up everywhere. He is the combination of absolutely brilliant and life-saving, but also just terrible to work with, pretty much a curmudgeon-y, horrible human being, very hard on students, pretty much has no love in his life, alienates everybody around him. He's smarter than everybody else in the room, and they have to kowtow to him. They just can't dismiss him. And they can't dismiss him for a couple of reasons. One is he's brilliant, so he gets a pass. Such a pass even that one of his coworkers enables him through consistent prescriptions of Vicodin for his injury, which we'll talk about in a second as well. And also at the teaching hospital. In teaching hospitals, the students need to really curry favor with the doctors. That's how they move ahead. And this guy's so brilliant that the students who work under him they have to really bend over backwards and absorb the abuse. Listen, I had several, what I'd say, borderline abusive teachers in my life. One of them was just so horrible, I won't discuss it. I saw him on a moped once, and I was in my car when I was 17, and I was like, nah, but I was close. But other teachers who were really tough on you were some of the best ones. And it's a fine line. And it's such a fine line that it's very difficult to write a character like this who goes so into the black as opposed to the gray that you just suddenly start hating him, and you lose those endearing qualities. So it's very difficult to write a show like this, as interesting as the setup is. Now, let's just talk about, let me just look at my notes for a second here. The procedural aspect also is an excuse to last several seasons long. If you look at Law and Order, they're like what? I mean, well, the original Law and Order was out after 20-something seasons, I think. But it's, that show has survived. The genre is like 30 years old, I think, this year, or something like that. And one of the reasons why it seems to still exist is because the characters, although they change over seasons, you'll have different detectives in different seasons, some will last 3, 4, 5 seasons, whatever. The characters themselves don't develop that much. You learn little pieces about them, their kids, their divorces, their hardships, things like that. You can mask all that stuff or hide it behind the procedural aspect, meaning you can reveal character traits slowly, meaning if you do it well, you can pique the interest of the viewer about a certain character without giving too much away. And by that alone, you want to tune in next week because now you just discovered this guy, had a twin brother who was murdered or something like that. And suddenly it deepens his character, someone you've been seeing week after week. And the procedural aspect takes you back week after week because it's very, there's a pleasurable aspect to it. They come in with an impossible disease. They think they got it cured. No, it's actually doing the reverse. They're stumped. The guy's going to die.
CSI is the same way.
Yeah. It's very patterned.
And I wanted to interject and just say, I'm not sure either of the templates we have currently kind of work for a procedural show like House or CSI or Law and Order, where I think they are kind of, there's a mystery always, they're kind of like mysteries. Like all these procedural shows are they're trying to figure out like what's going on. More so than, even though any of these shows, they're all, absorbed in this mystery component. But so really the emphasis and focus is mystery. So it may be, I was thinking that as you're talking, I'm thinking, we probably need a procedural template. We need the sitcom and we need the procedural template as well, I think.
The procedural template is not far off. I think it's actually there in the material now. It almost needs to be simplified to an extent.
No. I think same thing with sitcom. I think it's all in the layout of the episode is where it's all in the layout of the episode. Yeah.
So I'm going to get into the script in a second, but what I want you to remember throughout all this is that the script weaves a narrative through that follows a certain case, the A story, if you will. It's the person who is sick, who is the subject of that show. The B and C stories in the background are going to be the character-specific related issues. It's going to be characters, their intermingling, their friction, their differences in worldviews and personalities. That's going to fuel this forward. Sometimes there's a bigger general sense, like, if we get through this fiscal year, then we'll have, something going on next year that'll be good. So there's a long-term drive. But overall, the aspect of the procedurals, we need to solve this thing today. I'm not worried about next week's episode. So therefore, the episodes are very modular. You can pretty much watch House out of order, still be very entertained, and then your mind have to put together the story linearly. But procedurals tend to stay on the air a long time, so it's a good business decision if you want to hook up with the procedural aspect and then emulate what House did, which is by making really interesting characters. Now, if you also notice, if you read the script, you'll notice there's a lot of little bits that are missing from the actual show. It might be a tagline, it might be a description, it might be another half a page of dialogue. And in another case, they gave one character's dialogue entirely to the parents of the patient, and I understand why. And what you should understand is, as a writer, they were actually writing the script about 6 times, it looks like. You're doing basically the first draft. We'll call that the first draft. You're doing some kind of rewrite or review of that. Then you're going to have a table read with the actors, and that's where it gets punched up. That's where you hear it for the first time with the talent. That's if you're lucky enough to have table reads. Some shows they just keep going, and the writers have to kind of read it for themselves. And then there's the rewrites and the production polish and things like that before they go into shooting. And then there's the on-set fixes. So now we're up to 5. The on-set fixes are the character, the actor's like, there's this line's a little chewy, or I'm having trouble saying this. Can I say it this way instead? And the writer who is credited that week will usually be on set and, try this, or let's try that, or they'll do alternate takes, things like that. And then the last time it's really edited is in the editing room, where they make a lot of the decisions, not just for character development. If you're a good writer's room, won't have any issue with that. It's more for time. And you'll notice that this show runs 44 minutes and 8 seconds, thereabouts. It's 53 scenes, and it's 61 pages. Even though the show itself is only 44 minutes long, wait a second, it should be 44 pages. In dialogue-heavy shows, you're going to get more of a ratio of, let's say, 1 page is what, 40 seconds of dialogue rather than a minute, and that adds up after several scenes. Guys, just do me a favor. I want to make sure I don't lose anybody or don't bore anybody to death. So throw something into the chat, just so I know you're still with me. And I want to take you where we want to go. I also realize that we are 30 seconds ahead of when everyone else sees it, so it's like a time delay for some reason. Okay. The other aspect of this is that they wanted to craft this in the style of Holmes and Watson. The link for the script and episode didn't work for Grace. Oh, thank you, George. Appreciate that. Okay, thanks, guys. I just want the reinforcement because it's like shouting into a closet, which I do when I'm not on with you guys. So they wanted to conceive of this like Holmes and Watson because there is that element of discovering and picking up clues, and that element of, is the audience with us? We're going to throw something in here that's going to baffle them, and then we're going to explain it later. Are they still with us? Are you with us? Are you with us? Are you with us? And are we pushing you forward? That's the narrative of the procedural aspect of it, and that really has to be firm and in place. Because if it doesn't, then you kind of lose the integrity of the show itself. And the characters often can save it, can mask for a bad A story, let's say, but you really want to make sure the procedural aspect is there. And it's so much like Holmes and Watson that the 2 main characters are really House and Wilson. Okay, that's how close it was. But instead of Wilson, one of the characters, the Watson character really ended up being being his support staff, the doctors who work for him. Okay, so moving on. What do we know about House? And I'm asking this because all these elements are going to be present in the script as you read it. And because it's series television, what they need to do is they need to mask the exposition in the dialogue. So even though these characters might know each other for 15, 20 years, they still need to kind of say things that catch the audience up on, is their relationship healthy? Is it not healthy? Is it full of friction? Do they love each other secretly? Why is he such a jerk? Why, what is his perspective as a jerk? Is he just a jerk to be a jerk, or is he a jerk because he has a a strong point of view. For anyone who didn't receive the script in the episode, Mitch can resend that. I thought it was part of the email.
No. It was the email I sent out yesterday, Alan, and who else didn't get it? So, well, Grace is saying the link didn't work. Alan is saying he didn't receive it. The email did go out yesterday, sort of the notice that we're going to do the training today. And as part of that, if you go back to that email, I kind of blocked off a section in that email, Alan. And if you didn't get it, check your spam. If not, just I can just send you the links. I'll post the links in the chat. But basically, I said we're going to be talking about House today, and here's a link to the script, and here's a link to the episode. I'll put them in the. I'll dig them up while Howard's talking, and I'll post them. I just don't want you guys to be getting off track looking at that while Howard's talking. So, but I'll send it.
Okay, so House is obviously the main character, played by Hugh Laurie, who is actually a comic actor from England. And I noticed this early on when I was in film school with Mitch, is that if you get comedy actors to play serious roles, there's a whole other level and depth to it, which is why you'll see, I don't know, Ray Romano. Well, he's not, forget Ray Romano. He wasn't nice to friends of mine. But you'll see a lot of comic actors taking a serious turn. You think about him. I have a sort of list in the back of my head. But what do we know about House? First of all, he's curmudgeon-y. He foils other people's happiness. If someone's happy, he will say something or introduce something or give him extra work to kind of temper that happiness because he won't have it. He's insensitive and callow. He's not sympathetic. He's very cold. But he's a genius, and he's a brilliant diagnostician. And it's important that he's a diagnostician. He's not a hands-on doctor. When they say we need surgery, he's not the guy who does the surgery. He's the guy walking around outside waiting to hear from the surgical doctor, who's usually the hero in a lot of these shows, about what the prognosis is. And House is always the guy to kind of, fix it or approve it or cure it or discover that missing link that is just so genius. And of course, they have medical people on staff, and they have a whole litany of books to look at all these strange and mysterious illnesses, and there's no shortage of those to make stories. The fact that he's brilliant and genius also makes everyone else bend over backwards, from his boss Cuddy, played by Lisa Edelstein, to his the unfortunate residents who work under him, who are Cameron and Chase, a male and a female. He's Australian. She's beautiful. It's television. And of course, those characters are going to be given some material to work with as well, because they're not just the third man through the door, which, by the way, is that allusion to the third guy through the door doesn't have any kind of personality, no depth. We don't know if he's a family man, but he's the guy who's shot dead, right? So that when they talk about third man through the door, it's like he's just going to be a body who we're going to use and get rid of to further our plot. What's very interesting about this doctor is that he's a Vicodin user, Vicodin abuser, if you will, and that is a key element of his character, who this guy is. He has a leg injury, so he hobbles around. So as much as his mouth goes off and he's just a wicked a-hole, he's actually, like, he can't run, he can barely move, he's in pain. And I noticed the backstory to that was that injury came about because of a misdiagnosis. And he's a diagnostician who's brilliant. So you see right there a thematic element that is from his origin story. And everything's going to come back to the origin story, because one of the doctors who was present during this misdiagnosis and subsequent infection that took over his leg and caused his muscles to die, as the story goes, he had an option to have two different kinds of surgery, one with a horrific recovery, and the other one they'd have to amputate the leg. He chose the horrific recovery, and while he was in a coma, his treating physician, who happens to be Lisa Edelstein's character, who's now his boss, made the decision to have a safer surgical procedure done where they take away the dead muscle and leaves him with this limp. So this woman, his boss, who's also is the object of love and affection and passion, is also part of his origin story. They didn't just drop these people into place. The residents usually are dropped into place because that's the way it works. But there's a history with House and these other characters. And by episode 3, and I'm not sure, I didn't read the pilot. I didn't really want to read the pilot. The point of this was to see what can I peer into an episode randomly and find something that really informs me about how to further character development through story, not just through exposition and purposely trying to create character development. The characters are developed through the situations that they're in. And how do you do that? That's the skill. That's the creativity. And it shouldn't be a matter of, well, what do we do now? It should be a matter of, we have to give him this situation. Name 5 situations that we can put him into, and let's look at the effects of each one and see if it works in our story. That's ideal. Okay, he's blunt. He's pragmatic. He's scheming. He likes to be disobedient, but he's not worthy of getting fired disobedient. What he likes to do is find creative, within the law sort of ways of getting around the duties he's told to perform. And a lot of the duties he's told to perform are patient-facing, meaning his boss, Cuddy, is trying to put him face-to-face with patients, the people who he's supposed to be sympathetic towards and really understand their plight. And his goal is to stay in the background as much as possible. I don't want to meet the patient. I'm not going to operate. Excuse me. I don't want to come face to face with them. I want to do what I do best, which is diagnose and figure out mysteries in the background. And she's trying to humanize them. So there's that continual friction of their relationship based on what she wants of him. She wants to kind of humanize him because maybe he's a potential love interest. That's sort of, I guess, the deeper feeling. He's also extremely talented. That's a turn on for her. At the same time, he's resistant both to the affection, because he's that kind of guy in that kind of situation. And second, he wants to shun and put off and discharge that responsibility. So right there you have a specific take on where their friction is. And yet he's charming. He's very witty. And okay, he's got the leg. Now that's all about House. Okay. And that plays out in several ways. He's very upfront about his Vicodin. He doesn't call it an addiction, but he's constantly on Vicodin for the extreme pain in his leg. And another doctor, the quote unquote Watson guy, Wilson, his friend, who he is sort of like his, I don't want to say guru, but he's like his, somewhat of his, protege he'll go to for advice and to bounce stuff off of. And also their conversations create a lot of the exposition. He actually keeps the Vicodin train rolling. And what that opens up for us story-wise, what that opens up for us story-wise is a good guy doing bad things. You want a doctor, even as brilliant, being a Vicodin addict. That, of course, is another thing to play with later on. It's going to come into play. It's going to become a problem. It is illegal. And they're helping him break the law, but he's saving lives. That creates compelling stories. Cuddy is the Lisa Edelstein character. She is House's boss. She's also part of his origin story, as I just said. She secretly pines for him because he's charming and he's a star of a TV show making $300,000 an episode. But she's also very frustrated by him. She's in awe of his expertise because he's pretty much everything that she wants, she to be herself. She's a doctor. He's a doctor. He's a genius. She puts him into situations to soften him, to face his demons, and to try to sympathize with patients, because she's very sympathetic. The flirtation that they have is always about work and personality. It's never something that's aimless or not doesn't have some kind of other implication or sourced from something that's intrinsic to their personalities. And what she really wants is for House to become a normal guy to an extent, as extraordinary as he is, to fall in line and play ball, both in the hospital and in love. And that's going to be a recurring thing. This is a very damaged guy who, over the course of several seasons, we hope makes little incremental advances towards being human. And then the other characters. Now, notice House, the list of House things was this big. Cuddy's this. Now we get down to Cameron and Chase, the two residents who work for House, and they do most of the, if not all of the, actual surgical procedures, prepping. They're interacting with the parents and the patient. They're the ones who are, coming up with theories and testing it. It's amazing because House is the star of the show, clearly, but they get a lot of screen time. And how do we advance their characters? Well, it's very simple. They both have backstories. I don't know either one of them. He's Australian, so I'm guessing he came over from Australia. But what we do know in this episode, at least, is that it's the beginning of, or it's the exposure of their romantic interest in each other by way of something she says. The patient who comes in had just had sex with his girlfriend and went into some kind of, comatose situation or something approaching that. And the girlfriend secretly confides in the doctor, could it be the rough sex that we just had? And the doctor's like, well, she's a little not too tall. She's very pretty. He's like, well, and that kind of piques his interest. And so the plot point creates a conversation that reveals the tension and sexual tension in the relationship between these two second characters, we'll call them.
And let me interject in that this is a very important point here, is that so much of a TV show content is the dialogue. It's not like there's going to be extensive action scenes. That would be unusual. Matter of fact, even something like Flash, which we've talked about somewhat extensively, the action scenes tend to be quite small, and the dialogue around those action scenes tends to be broad. And it's a lot of the characters explaining sort of what's going on. So when it comes to writing the script, and we see that here, is it's all about identifying and knowing who those characters are based on your work in the software, their origin story, all the details that we've gone through, and how the characters interact. And clearly here you see they're setting up a relationship between the one doctor and the other one, and it all comes through the situation of what's taking place. One story, when we discussed this last time, one story is about this kid who gets sick and they're having rough sex, which then leads to a dialogue between two of the doctors who are attracted to each other, and their dialogue is about the relationship that's developing between them. And the dialogue is it's a lot more, as I say, on the nose dialogue. The characters are literally talking about what is going on in the TV show. So I think that's a part of what you're focused on as you're writing the scripts. Is what should they be speaking about? They're speaking literally about what is happening and what is going on the soap opera, as I call it, the soap opera level of the script.
And the trick is to mask all that exposition in the dialogue so well that you don't go, oh, geez, come on, I know, and they'll do that by having a new doctor walk into the room and say, what's going on? Like, And then the other, the first doctor will quote what happened the last 7 minutes of the show. Also, they will try regimens. Well, it must be this, so let's give them this. They'll try these regimens, and the regimens won't just fail; they'll backfire. The thing we thought was going to cure him is actually killing him. Okay, and then they, in an effort to try to find the right cure, they now go over exposition again, and they'll do it in the form of, okay, so let's go through the chronology of this. Patient presents himself as blah, blah, blah. We give him blah, blah, blah. So now if you come in 25 minutes late to the show, you pretty much know what the plot is at this point. So that's built into it. The same with the Flash. The Flash will come in and be like, since so-and-so took over the city and my powers don't work against him because of X, Y, and Z, we need to figure out where his vulnerabilities are. Boom. I just know the first half of that show right there. So listen, there's a certain mechanical procedure to this. But the art is how well you can bury the exposition in the dialogue. And in the best case scenario, you're planting, I don't want to say burying, you're planting the exposition in the dialogue, but in such a way that the character's point of views about that, which are very precise, create the friction and the revelation of story, character, background, feelings that will drive the narrative forward, at least on the level of the B and C story. Explaining what happened in the past doesn't push the narrative forward; it catches people up. But within that, if you can hide or mask or or infuse it with something that pushes the characterizations forward, then it doesn't look like a wasted scene. The audience gets two things out of it. They get caught up on what's going on, and they get kind of caught up in the development of the character's relationship and where it's going now. So just, I'm not going to go through the script page by page, although I certainly could. The opening scene is pretty much just the teaser. Sometimes in comedy call it a cold open or whatnot. The teaser sets up just like it did in 6 Feet Under. In 6 Feet Under, it was like, how's this guy going to die in a unique way that he's going to end up at the funeral home owned by the main characters. So here it's how does this person become a patient who's going to end up in front of House's crew? And that goes on for 2 minutes and 18 seconds. We have the opening show credits, then we go right into Act 1. Okay? Act 1 will usually address, in this case, because there's a lot of dialogue and a lot of medicine, they might come in for half a second in most shows and further something in the relationship or set up a B story or a C story. Usually the B story first, since it's alphabetical. In this show, they kind of cut right to it and address the situation at hand that was in the teaser, which is this character. And they'll kind of catch up. They'll advance the story, the procedural story, by talking about what his symptoms are, what it could be, what they're going to do, and that advances that. Then the B story comes into play.
And I think that it's hard to, we are looking at House, and I think it's a procedural show, and I don't think it's a direct parallel to the two templates that we currently have in the software. And that's why I was saying that there may be an opportunity here for a fourth, again, assuming we're going to do a sitcom in the near future. And I think, something, a CSI breakdown type of procedural show as well. So I think that's why we're seeing a complete parallel from House to one of our existing templates.
Right. But I think also in the way that you are, in the way characters who are not the main character or are relating to the main character, you're basically planting the same kind of seeds you're going to in pretty much every
absolutely. Yeah. For sure all the B stories are going to play out very similarly, but it's more how the procedural part of the show is laid out in an episode. I think all of the thinking about who the main characters are, who the enemy is, if there's an enemy, who all that, you think about that still independent of the episodes, because you have to know all of that. Mm-hmm. And you develop your episode story, you develop your season the same way, you figure out your episodes, and then you play it into the, each individual episode, is where the individual episodes which changes. That's all I'm saying.
Right. No. And in the initial season of House, we're still getting to know him and his environment. So they're setting up a bunch of things. So in episode 3, one of the B story is Cuddy, Lisa Edelstein's character, his boss, is trying to make him an attending physician for these people who come in, I guess, to the emergency room or something. And he does not want to, because he doesn't like facing patients. So their dialogue consists of her having him come into the situation, and then their exchange expresses their worldview. Okay, and I'll just use this. I'll quote it briefly. He comes in, making an excuse. He's busy with a case. She goes, "You're not busy. You have one case." He goes, Are we really going to keep doing this dance? You don't need me here." And she says, "This treating patients dance? Yeah, I'm way out of line." Okay. And then he says, I don't like people. It's like, it's a good actor pulls off that line perfectly. If I'm reading it and I don't know who I'm going to cast, it's like, she knows this. So why is he saying it? So he's, but they're able to pull it off. I don't like people, which is his worldview. Why should I start caring about them just because they're sick? And that has the double entendre of, well, not a double entendre, but the double meaning for him of, I'm going to look at them as patients, as objects. And I'm going to, and why should I care about them just because they're sick? It's not going to change. I don't, it's a mixture of things. He doesn't want to be vulnerable. he doesn't want to deal with all these patients' BS. So then House turns to the room, and this is as much for the audience's benefit as it is for the room. I'd say more for the audience, since telling the story. But he says to the room, "Attention, everybody! I'm a board-certified diagnostician with a double specialty in infectious disease and nephrology." That's so we, the audience who tuned into the show and missed the first 2 episodes, know, oh wow, this guy's a double specialty in infectious disease and nephrology. He goes, "I'm also the only doctor currently employed at this clinic who was forced to be here against his will. This is true, isn't it?" And he turns to her. She doesn't back him up. And he says, okay, so he's not going to get out of this that way. So he says, "But you don't need to worry, because for most of you, this job could be done by a monkey with a bottle of Motrin. Speaking of which, if you're particularly annoying, you may see me reach for this." He pulls out a bottle of Vicodin. He pulls out a pill from the Vicodin bottle. "This is Vicodin. It's mine. You can't have any. Not to worry, I do not have pain management problem. I have a pain problem. But who knows? Maybe I'm wrong." With a smile friendly, he says, "Maybe I'm too stoned to tell. Okay, who wants me?" And none of the people in the room raise their hand. And he goes, "And who would rather wait for one of the other guys?" And they all raise their hand. So the B story is in the fun way this unrolls itself. Is he's given an assignment. He's not going to dodge it and say, "No, I'm not doing it." He's simply going to make it impossible for him to basically complete the task and not make it his fault, or he won't be the cause of it. And that's the dance that he and Cuddy do. And the fun part, the fun and games aspect of it, is the way in which he does it. So if we were in the writer's room saying, okay, let's put House in a situation where every other doctor is going, where every other doctor would normally function and flourish and be witty and fun and George Clooney-like, we're going to make him in complete opposition to that. And that's going to serve 2 purposes. 1, he doesn't play that game. And 2, he's coy enough to get people to back him up in his point of view by being obnoxious and potentially scaring them. And so they pretty much are going to sit around and think of, what can he say? What can he do? And by making him upfront about the Vicodin, it really, it says a lot about this character that this doctor walks into the hospital room and actually says this. So I'm not going to go into every single situation, but they do. But I urge you to read the script. I urge you to look at the episode, and then either circle with a pen or use a highlighter. Point to the different lines there in the scenes where those lines do more than just advance the plot, but really express the point of view of the character. Because ultimately, the drama in this, that moves this forward, is the interactions between characters who have different points of view, different ways of being, are circling each other because of romantic interest, but are like planets. They can't go too much into each other's orbit for fear of getting sucked into it, for being unprofessional, for becoming vulnerable. And they're all under the boss of a guy who is pretty much completely unemotional, hard to crack. He's insulting, he's demeaning, and yet it's the ultimate reward when you please him. Although he'll undercut you in such a way that you'll know that he approves because of the way he kind of destroys you in the process. He's one of those guys. I'm sure we all encountered one person like that in our lives. And the whole thing is wrapped up in the context of life and death, and everything that means to us personally. And you always have the parents there. Interesting thing is, the patient is usually the least sympathetic person in the show, even though he's the guy who's going to live or die. But his living or dying seems to be of more consequence as the viewer to the doctors than it is to the patient, because we don't know anything about the patient. So in this show, what's interesting, and the first act goes to page 10. I'm sorry, it goes to the 10-minute mark if you weren't counting the commercials. What they do is, in order to care about the patient, remember who the patient is. When the parents of this guy who falls out in the teaser, when his parents rush into the hospital to see him, the girl who we just thought was a girlfriend, they had sex, he got sick, they went to the hospital. He announces to the parents, "This is Mindy. This is on scene 14. parents come in. We're the parents. How's he doing? Before he can answer, Brandon speaks with difficulty. Mom, Dad, coughs. This is Mindy. I was going to bring her for Christmas. We're engaged. And suddenly there's another level to this character who we don't really care about because he's a disposable character of the episode. But now suddenly, I don't know, we are concerned because they're engaged. They've thrown something into the future, a marriage, and is it going to happen? Is it not going to happen? And now for the first time, we see they add a little bit of depth to this relationship and to these characters, and something that is at stake for them as well as just us as the doctors. Otherwise, each episode would be, bodies coming in, corpses going out, bodies coming in, corpses going out, or people walking out the front door and we don't care about them. So they instill even the smallest character with the smallest characteristic that gives us a little bit of sympathy for them. Man, I have so many notes, but I don't want to bore you guys to tears or get too granular. But it's the way they introduce. I mean, what's great is that they have a list of things they need to introduce. We're going to have the two characters circle each other, the two residents, the male and the female. So we need a mechanism to get into that conversation, and the mechanism they chose is where the girlfriend confides in the male resident. Do you think basically the sex that I gave him or whatever, did him in? Is that what could kill him? And then he brings that over to the female. He quotes it, and she has some kind of response. And now they're talking about the patient, but they're talking about sex, but they're talking about the patient, and the underlying current of what it means to the two of them, outside of the diagnostic aspect of it and the medical aspect of it, is kind of, I guess, a template for how these characters are going to carry on. It's always going to be professional in the about the patient, but if it has to do with something that resonates with them individually or together, that makes for good writing as well. So here, and they both, and instead of having the story develop in one shot, they pretty much have we're going to wrap it up very soon. And we're going to, instead of having them just discuss it and blow it out in one shot, they use one of the third characters. They use who first talks to the guy, and they have a conversation about her. She's beyond the window; she can't hear what they're saying, and then she has a conversation with the third person as well, and out of earshot of him, and that furthers their interest in each other while convincing this other guy, no, I'm not interested in him. I'm not interested in her, and then finally they have the conversation at the end where what they do creatively, and then I'll hand it over to Mitch, is in order to take the sexual frustration the two characters are kind of feeling as they're dealing with the situation and each other. She talks about, again, going back to the diagnosis, of going back to medicine, about how she has a whole monologue about how sex is rough on the body, and if it wasn't so pleasurable, mankind wouldn't exist. And then she talks about how the heart gets faster and the cells, and the pupils dilate and the blood pressure increases. And as they cut to him and as they describe it in the script, he's going through those various sensations as she's saying it. So that's the culmination of that storyline is in this almost narratively erotic moment between the two of them, which then is undercut by someone coming in going, he coded or something like that, which interrupts it, which is kind of their story going on and on. So in this episode, by that point, their relationship has notched up a certain degree. We don't know where it's going, but it notched up, and now we're more interested in them. We carry that into next week. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer. If anyone has any insights also, because I know as I was circling this and going deeper and deeper, and I'm only talking about one episode, I was trying to do two things. One is I was trying to read the episode and reverse engineer it in my mind and see, well, what was deliberately planned, and what do I think they kind of just fell into because the actor was able to deliver that way or whatnot. Was Hugh Laurie what they had in mind when they cast, or did he bring this whole other element that allowed the writers, which often happens in subsequent seasons, does the character bring in interests that the writers then turn to? Like, I mean, 90210, Luke Perry just passed away, and that's a terrible thing. But in 90210, as a friend of mine who used to be an executive producer of the show said, you'll notice in the talk about patterns and storytelling, in the third act of every 90210, there was a party, because there was always a party. We always put a party in there. But what they did was, like with Brian Austin Green's character in that show, the actor had a personal interest in, I don't know, rapping or beatboxing or dancing or whatever it was. And they introduced that because he's good at it. And so it made sense. And by season 3, 4, 5, you're kind of running dry on storylines. So again, if there's any questions, please shoot them in there. Otherwise, I hope that this kind of sheds some light in a way that we're talking about origin story and how it continues to play out in episodes, how relationships continue to build, and sort of the whole paradigm of the procedural, where the main thrust of the story is what they need to accomplish and get done. We're going to, it's a good segue. As you guys know, we're going to be hosting this advanced training, which was offered to you when you first bought Episode Control, and Mitch is opening the door again for everyone to have another opportunity, if you haven't already, to join it. But if you had an interest in what we were doing with this, then you're going to love what we're doing with the advanced training, because we're actually going into show Bibles. And we have a couple of show Bibles that were kind of secreted to me. And we really get an idea of the thought process that goes into the concept, and then how to artistically and creatively dole it out into a series, basically, because you're coming up with a concept, and then that concept is going to transform into characters, and characters' desires and the actions that are subsequent to that. And that's pretty much how it plays out. All of life is really desire put into action. And sometimes that action is rebuffed. And when it's rebuffed, it gets interesting. So that's pretty much, but it's not always black versus white. The best shows function in the gray area. And if you can identify and elucidate that, then you really get an idea, a further idea of how to develop material on a whole different level than you came in on. And that's the goal of the advanced training, is that you come in kind of understanding things on a certain level, and whatever level that is, because we have people of all different levels are enrolled in this, including some showrunners, I understand. And then you come out of it on the other side with just, you've leapt up several levels of understanding of how to both functionally, how to take your ideas to the next level in terms of dialogue and plotting scenes and episodes, but also just kind of an understanding of what other people are doing and how they've done it, so that we can reverse engineer that process and borrow it for ourselves. Because at the end of the day, there are, like in any profession, certain techniques and, dare I call them, tricks that allow you to shortcut a process that someone else will have to take, hours, days, years more to do. If you're a plumber, certain ways to fix a leak faster than the average guy is going to know. And a more experienced writer and showrunner and developer of these stories, the more things you're exposed to, and the deeper level in which you'll accumulate a toolbox of techniques that you can apply to different situations, especially in television, where you're really under pressure. Whether it's grinding out a show a week, or if it's doing all 13 before it premieres, they have their individual pressures. But time and creativity always seem to work at odds with each other. Some people are better under pressure. Some people are not as good under pressure. But as you go forward in the business and in the skill, you're going to have this toolbox, and we want to help you fill that. And the first step after this is the advanced training. Cheers.
All right. Well, thank you, Howard. Amazing. It was really much more than I think. It was amazing. That's all I'm going to say. I mean, it was just more than just talking about how to approach the screenwriting craft part of the process. That's for sure. We kind of forgot that part a little bit. No, but it was good. It was great stuff. Anybody comments, questions, thoughts before we sign off? Really great. Obviously, you can email us after this, just Howard at Episode Control, or info at Episode Control, or, info@realwriting.com. Any of those emails. If you have any questions, now's a good time. Howard very effectively pitched the advanced training. Bonnie, you have a question. Okay, let's bring a Sherlock Holmes question. Sherlock and House have similar characteristics, but yet they are totally different characters. One has like a likability factor, but the other one does not. What would you say is the difference maker in character?
I guess the question, Bonnie, also is, and I might be off on my understanding of it, but who has the likability factor? Is it Sherlock? Because there's two things we're talking about when we talk about characters like this. Excuse me a second. We're talking about likability, and we're talking about lovability. I guess the prime example of that is Tony Soprano. Is he likable? No, I don't think so. He's scary, but is he lovable? He has to be in order for us to follow him. So, yeah, it's as opposed to House. Yes. One thing we know about the thing about Sherlock Holmes is that I'm just kind of this is kind of me answering on one foot, so I might have a better idea tomorrow. But Sherlock Holmes is like James Bond in a sense. He's not only played by different actors, he's not really instilled with an origin story that affects him episode to episode or movie to movie. The closest we have in a lot of these movies like James Bond is that they had to give up a family for their safety, give up a marriage or a loved one for their safety. And that's part of their origin story that drives them forward to save the world because they sacrifice so much. But Sherlock, I personally don't know his backstory. I didn't read the book. And every time I've seen it, it's always been a Sherlock Holmes mystery where he's a genius who comes into the situation and very little is revealed about him. I don't even know if he's married. Does he have kids? I don't know anything about him. But House is much more specific, and I think, in a sense, much more realistic. And I think that if you're developing, it's a different type of show. If we were to humanize Sherlock more, I think that you could find the good and the bad in him. But ultimately, he's someone who does what he does. In Elementary, it's heroin. Oh, interesting. You know what? I'm sorry. I didn't realize you were talking about that incarnation of it. Interesting. Maybe there's I don't want to give you a quick answer, but maybe there's a difference between House using Vicodin and Sherlock using heroin. And maybe that plays out in the way the characters interact with the situations and with other characters. Now, I admittedly have not seen an episode of Elementary. I have a friend who's worked on it for years, and I hope she's not on this call. But I've not seen an episode of that. But just if it rings a bell, if it makes any sense to you as someone who's familiar with the show, maybe the aspect of the drug of choice influences that person's relationship or point of view or outlook on life, episode to episode. And I think that is what it might be. Plus, Sherlock is also almost kind of like a savant. And a lot of savants in television they're gifted on one level, but they're also, I don't want to use the term incorrectly, they're retarded in another. They're not up to, they have something that draws them down. So it's almost like a balance, a pendulum. As great as they are, is as miserable a son of a bitch as they could be. And I'm also seeing that in David Shore's new show, which is called The Good Doctor. Again, a very gifted young doctor, but he's on the spectrum. And they play, and the stories that come out of that are amazing. So I'm thinking that maybe, like, I don't know. Let me know if any of that kind of makes sense. And I'll try to catch an episode of that, because I'd like to see the way the heroin plays out episode to episode. Does he keep it a secret? Is it an open secret? So it's not premeditated like with House. There's a difference. Premeditated as in what? Do you mean the crime week to week, or something in the characterization? I'm just curious. Sorry, there's a 30-second lag, so it's by the time Bonnie, their behaviors. Okay. House, I don't know what Sherlock is trying to achieve in Elementary overall. I have an idea and I can't really put it into one sentence, but I have an idea of what House is looking for. If nothing else, he's looking to stir trouble, and out of the cauldron of trouble comes brilliance. Houses mean Sherlock is more distant. Interesting. And it's a difficult balance. I mean, does Sherlock, distance is the opponent of creating a compelling love story, unless you're able to see parts of the character that deep down they want what the other character wants, and they just won't allow themselves to have it. Distant can mean a bunch of different things. Mean is usually a cover-up for something else. Mean is often a cover-up for not wanting to be vulnerable, or feeling vulnerable, or feeling less than, or something. It's not actually a thing on its own. It's always a reaction to something else. And the better the origin story, the better we understand that reaction. But if Sherlock is just distant, well, that could be a lot of things. His family could have been murdered before his eyes, like Bruce Wayne, who was also very distant. But they balance the Bruce Wayne distance with the superhero aspect of it, so it balances out. If he wasn't a superhero, we wouldn't really care anything about Bruce Wayne. Least of all that he comes in this origin story, unless they're able to do something with that. So I'm curious about. Now you didn't hijack. I kind of went with it. I hope any of that was interesting. I was really just thinking on my feet, but underneath, you want to understand the true motivations of your character. And House gives you a lot of different things to think about. Plus, with House itself, there's also this there's also sort of a catharsis we feel when he tells somebody off, or he tells something like it is, and that's we kind of, when he comes up against characters that we ourselves as an audience don't like, and he makes mincemeat out of them. It's there's a certain cathartic nature of that. Plus, we also like seeing him creatively tear people down while he's helping build them up, while he's still teaching them, while he's still loyal to them. It's a very interesting mix, which is why I think that no one else can play House. It's not gonna be like Sherlock Holmes, where the next guy to play House is gonna be Jason Patrick. No, House is House because of Hugh Laurie's characterization of him, but yet so many people can play Sherlock. I think that's one of the main differences as well.
Awesome. The one thing I would say, you could also look at, what makes the shows different ultimately is, what's the fabric of the show, the clothing the show wears. In the core, they're probably again, I'm not familiar with that one, but with the Sherlock show at all, but they're probably at the core, they're procedural shows, right? Each one is trying to solve a mystery episode to episode. Sherlock is trying to solve a crime, and House is trying to solve a mystery of what the illness is. So we have the core show is extremely similar. So, if we had the template for it, we would probably see a very similar template. Maybe some modifications from production company to production company. You'd see some variations, but very similar. And then it gets wrapped up, it gets dressed up in this character Sherlock, and these are the assistants, and this is what's going on, and this is the locations, and this episode is House, and these are the assistants, and this is the locations. So we see that at the core, the templates are very similar, which is why the template approach that Episode Control provides will work. I'm not saying the templates that we've built are for every single possible show. We're going to try and build out different templates. But what you see is at the core of these shows, very similar. And how you dress them up, how you build everything out is what defines one show from the next show.
I also think one of the key things when you're trying to think of your character's motivations underlying their worldview, one question you might want to ask yourself is, what's stopping them from being happy? And that could be the pain that House is feeling in his leg, the physical pain. It could be the fact he can't go back in time and fix things. The fact that, he feels betrayed, or he betrayed someone else. And he's living with these things. You want to ask why your character isn't happy. And it's usually because they want to. It always comes from the origin story, but that origin story creates a desire that is present throughout the entire show. And if you can identify that, then I think you're on their way to building deeper characters.
All right. So next week we'll pick this up Monday or Tuesday, probably Tuesday, with one more training session for the basic part of this program, and that is going to be, we're going to go through the drama series template. And if you have, bring your final questions with us for that. And then after that, we're going to pick up with the advanced training, as we've mentioned. All right. Thank you, everyone. Once again.
Thank you very much. Welcome your feedback. Thank you.
And we'll see you next week.